Chapter 1. It took 7 years to get the letter right. Oh, and actually I need to switch over again, because these are, as you can see, letters. Like handwritten letters. Year 50, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Mr. Caraval Master, my name is Scarlet, but I'm writing this letter for my sister, Donatella. It's going to be her birthday soon, and she would very much like to see you and your amazing Caraval players. Her birthday is the 37th day of the growing season, and it would be the most wonderfulest birthday ever if you came. Most hopefully, Scarlet, from the conquered Isle of Trisda. Year 51, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Mr. Caraval Master, it's Scarlet again. Did you get my last letter? This year, my sister says she's too old to celebrate birthdays, but I think she's just upset you never came to Trisda. This growing season, she'll be 10, and I'll be 11. She won't admit it, but she'd still very much like to see you and your wondrous Caraval players. Most hopefully, Scarlet, from the conquered Isle of Trisda. Year 52, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Master Legend, I'm sorry I got your name wrong in those other letters. I hope that's not why you haven't come to Trisda. My little sister's birthday wasn't the only reason I've wanted you to bring your amazing Caraval players here. I'd love to see them too. Sorry this letter is short. My father will be angry if he catches me writing to you. Most hopefully, Scarlet, from the conquered Isle of Trisda. Year 52, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Caraval Master Legend, I just heard the news and I wanted to send my condolences. Even though you still haven't come to Trisda or responded to any of my letters, I know you're not a murderer. I was very sorry to hear that you won't be traveling for a while. Most kindly, Scarlet, from the conquered Isle of Trisda. Year 55, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Master Legend, do you remember the Scarlet from the conquered Isle? Do you remember me, Scarlet, from the conquered Isle of Trisda? I know it's been a few years since I wrote. I heard you and your players have started performing again. My sister told me you never visit the same place twice, but a lot has changed since you visited here 50 years ago, and I truly don't believe anyone would like to see one of your performances more than I would. Most hopefully, Scarlet. Year 56, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Master Legend, I heard you visited the capital of the Southern Empire last year and changed the color of the sky. Is that true? I actually tried attending with my sister, but we're not supposed to leave Trisda. Sometimes I believe I'll never go farther than the Conquered Isles. I suppose that's why I've wanted you and your players to come here so badly. It's probably futile to ask again, but I do hope you'll consider coming. Most hopefully, Scarlet, from the conquered Isle of Trisda. Year 57, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Master Legend, this will be my final letter. I'm going to be married soon, so it's probably best you and your players don't come to Trisda this year. Scarlet Dragna. And now we have a, well, you can't really see that, but we have a different looking letter this time. Year 57, Elytrine Dynasty. Dear Scarlet Dragna, from the conquered Isle of Trisda, congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. I am sorry I cannot bring my players to Trisda. We're not traveling this year. Our next performance is by invitation only, but I would look forward to meeting you and your fiancé if you could find a way to leave your isle and join us. Please accept the enclosed as a gift. From the pen of Caraval, Master Legend. And that's the end of chapter 1. So, Clearly she's trying really hard to get this guy's attention. And after 7 years, here we go. Chapter 2. Scarlet's feelings came in colors even brighter than usual. The urgent red of burning coals, the eager green of new grass buds, the frenzied yellow of a flapping bird's feathers. He'd finally written back. She read the letter again, then again, and again. Her eyes took in each sharp stroke of ink, every waxy curve of the Caraval master's silver crest. A sun with a star inside, and a teardrop inside of the star. The same seal was watermarked onto the enclosed slips of paper. This was no prank. Donatella! Scarlet plunged down the steps into the barrel room in search of her younger sister. The familiar sense of molasses and oak snaked up her nose, but her scoundrel of a sibling was nowhere to be found. Tella, where are you? Oil lamps cast an amber glow over bottles of rum and several freshly filled wooden barrels. Scarlet heard a moan as she moved past, and she caught bits of heavy breathing as well. After her latest battle with her father, Tella had probably drunk too much, and now dozed somewhere on the floor. Donna... She choked on the last half of her sister's name. Hello, Scar. Tella flashed Scarlet a sloppy grin, all white teeth and swollen lips. Her honey blonde curls were a mess as well, and her shawl had fallen to the floor. But it was the sight of the young sailor with his hands wrapped around Tella's waist that made Scarlet stutter. Did I interrupt something? Nothing we can't start up again. The sailor spoke with a lilting Southern Empire accent, far smoother sounding than the sharp Meridian Empire tongues Scarlet was accustomed to. Tella giggled, but at least she had the grace to blush a little. Scar, you know Julian, right? Lovely seeing you, Scarlet. Julian smiled, as cool and seductive as a slice of shade in the hot season. Scarlet knew the polite response would be something along the lines of, good to see you too. But all she could think about were his hands, still coiled around Tella's periwinkle skirts, playing with the tassels on her bustle, as if she were a parcel he couldn't wait to unwrap. Julian had only been on the Isle of Trisda about a month. When he'd swaggered off his ship, tall and handsome, with golden brown skin, he'd drawn almost every woman's eye. Even Scarlet's head had turned briefly, but she'd known better than to look any longer. Tella, mind if I pull you away for a moment? Scarlet managed to nod politely at Julian, but the instant they'd woven through enough barrels to be out of his hearing, she said, What are you doing? Scar, you're getting married. I would think you'd be aware of what occurs between a man and a woman. Tella nudged her sister's shoulder playfully. That's not what I'm talking about. You know what will happen if Father catches you, which is why I don't plan on getting caught. Please be serious, Scarlet said. I am being serious. If Father catches us, I'll just find a way to blame it on you. Tella gave a tart smile. But I don't think you came down here to talk about that. Her eyes dropped to the letter in Scarlet's hands. The hazy glow of a lantern caught the metallic edges of the paper, making them blaze a shimmery gold, the color of magic and wishes and promises of things to come. The address on the envelope lit up with equal luster. Miss Scarlet Dragna, care of the priest's confessional, Trisda, conquered isles of the Meridian Empire. Tella's eyes sharpened as she took in the radiant script. Scarlet's sister had always liked beautiful things, like the young man still waiting for her behind the barrels. Often, if Scarlet lost one of her prettier possessions, she could find it tucked away in her younger sister's room. But Tella didn't reach out to take this note. Her hands remained at her sides, as if she wanted nothing to do with it. Is this another letter from the Count? She spat out the title, as if he were the devil. Scarlet considered defending her fiancé, but her sister had already clearly expressed her thoughts on Scarlet's engagement. It made no difference that arranged marriages were very much in fashion throughout the rest of the Meridian Empire, or that for months the Count had faithfully sent Scarlet the kindest letters. Tella refused to understand how Scarlet could marry someone she'd never met in person. But wedding a man she'd never seen frightened Scarlet far less than the thought of staying on Trisda. Well, Trisda pressed, are you going to tell me what it is then? It's not from the Count, Scarlet spoke quietly, not wanting Tella's sailor friend to overhear. It's from the Master of Caraval. He wrote you back? Tella snatched the note. God's teeth! Shh! Scarlet pushed her sister back towards the barrels. Someone might hear you. Am I not allowed to celebrate now? Tella retrieved the 3 slips of paper hidden within the invite. Lamplight caught their water seals. For a moment they glowed gold, like the edges of the letter, before shifting to a dangerous shade of bloody crimson. Do you see that? Tella gasped as swirls of silver letters materialized across the page, slowly dancing into words. Admit 1. Donatella Dragna of the Conquered Isles. Scarlet's name appeared on the other. The third only contained the words, Admit 1. Like the other invites, this was printed above the name of an isle she'd never heard of. Isla de los Sueños. Scarlet imagined this nameless invitation was meant for her fiancé, and for a moment she thought of how romantic it could be to experience Caraval with him once they were married. Oh look, there's more! Tella squealed as new lines of script appeared on the tickets. To be used once to gain entrance into Caraval. Main gates close at midnight, and on the 13th day of the growing season, during the 57th year of the Atlantean dynasty. Anyone who arrives later than this will not be able to participate in the game or win this year's prize of 1 wish. That's only 3 days away, Scarlet said, the bright colors she'd felt before turning to her usual dull shades of gray disappointment. She should have known better than to think, even for a moment, that this could work out. Maybe if Caraval were in 3 months, or even 3 weeks, sometime after she was married. Scarlet's father had been secretive about the exact date of her wedding, but she knew it would not be in less than 3 days. Leaving before then would be impossible, and far too dangerous. But look at this year's prize, said Tella. A wish. I thought you didn't believe in wishes. And I thought you'd be happier about this, Tella said. You know people would kill to get their hands on these? Did you not see the part where he said we need to leave the Isle? No matter how badly Scarlet longed to go to Caraval, she needed to get married even more. To make it in 3 days, we'd probably have to leave tomorrow. Why do you think I'm so excited? The glimmer in Tella's eyes grew brighter. When she was happy, the world turned shimmery, making Scarlet want to beam along with her and say yes to whatever her sister desired. But Scarlet had learned too well how treacherous it was to hope in something as elusive as a wish. Scarlet sharpened her voice, hating herself for being the one to crush her sister's joy, but better she than someone who would destroy even more than that. Were you also drinking rum down there? Have you forgotten what Father did the last time we tried to leave Trisda? Tella flinched. For a moment, she looked like the fragile girl she pretended so hard not to be. Then, just as quickly, her expression changed, pink lips curving once again, shifting from broken to unbreakable. That was 2 years ago. We're smarter now. We also have more to lose, Scarlet insisted. It was easier for Tella to brush aside what had happened when they'd attempted to go to Caraval before. Scarlet had never told her sister the entirety of what their father had done as retribution. She'd not wanted Tella to live in that much fear, to constantly look over her shoulder, to know there were worse things than their father's standard forms of punishment. Don't tell me this is because you're afraid it will interfere with your wedding. Tella gripped the tickets tighter. Stop. Scarlet grabbed them back. You're going to crinkle their edges. And you're avoiding my question, Scarlet. Is this about your wedding? Of course not. It's about not being able to get off the island tomorrow. We don't even know where this other place is. I've never heard of Isla de los Sueños, but I know it's not one of the Conquered Isles. I know where it is. Julian stepped out from behind several rum barrels, flashing a smile that said he'd make no apologies for listening in on a private conversation. This doesn't concern you? Scarlet waved him away with her hand. Julian looked at her strangely, as if a girl had never dismissed him. I'm only trying to help. You've never heard of this isle because it's not part of the Meridian Empire. It's not ruled by any of the 5 empires. Isla de los Sueños is Legend's private isle, only about 2 days' journey. And if you want to go there, I can smuggle you onto my ship for a price. Julian eyed the third ticket. Thick lashes lined his light brown eyes, just made for convincing girls to lift their skirts and open their arms. Tella's words about people who kill for the tickets echoed in Scarlet's mind. Julian might have had a charming face, but he also had that Southern Empire accent, and everyone knew the Southern Empire was a lawless place. No, Scarlet said. It's too dangerous if we get caught. Everything we do is dangerous. We'll be in trouble if we get caught down here with a boy, Tella said. Julian looked offended at being referred to as a boy, but Tella went on before he could argue. Nothing we do is safe, but this is worth the risk. You've waited your whole life for this, wished on every fallen star, prayed as every ship came into port that it would be that magical one carrying the mysterious Caraval performers. You want this even more than I do. Whatever you've heard about Caraval, it doesn't compare to the reality. It's more than just a game or a performance. It's the closest you'll ever find to magic in this world. Her grandmother's words played in Scarlet's head as she looked at the slips of paper in her hands. The Caraval stories she adored as a young girl never felt more real than they did in that moment. Scarlet always saw flashes of color attached to her strongest emotions, and for an instant, goldenrod desire lit up inside her. Briefly, Scarlet let herself imagine what it would be like to go to Legend's private isle, to play the game and win the wish. Freedom, choices, wonder, magic. A beautiful, ridiculous fantasy. And it was best to keep it that way. Wishes were about as real as unicorns. When she was younger, Scarlet had believed her Nana's stories about Caraval's magic. But as she'd grown, she'd left those fairy tales behind. She'd never seen any proof that magic existed. Now it seemed far more likely that her Nana's tales were the exaggerations of an old woman. A part of Scarlet still desperately wanted to experience the splendor of Caraval, but she knew better than to believe its magic would change her life. The only person capable of giving Scarlet or her sister a brand new life was Scarlet's fiancé, the Count. Now that they were no longer held up to the lamplight, the script on the tickets had vanished, and they looked almost ordinary again. Tella, we can't. It's too risky. If we try to leave the isle... Scarlet broke off as the stairs to the bell room creaked. The heavy tread of boots followed, at least 3 sets. Scarlet shot a panicked look at her sister. Tella cursed and quickly made a motion for Julian to hide. Don't disappear on my account. Governor Dragna finished his descent, the sharp odor of his heavily perfumed suit spoiling the pungent scents of the barrel room. Quickly, Scarlet shoved the letters into her dress pocket. Behind her father, 3 guards followed his every step. I don't believe we've met. Ignoring his daughters, Governor Dragna reached a gloved hand toward Julian. He wore his plum-colored gloves, the shade of dark bruises and power. But at least he still had the gloves on. The picture of civility, Governor Dragna liked to dress impeccably, in a tailored black frock coat and striped purple waistcoat. He was in his mid-40s, but he'd not let his body turn to fat like other men. Keeping with the latest fashion, he kept his blonde hair tied back with a neat black bow, showing off his manicured eyebrows and dark blonde goatee. Julian was taller, but the governor still managed to look down upon him. Scarlet could see her father appraising the sailor's patched brown coat and his loose breeches tucked into scuffed knee-high boots. It said much about Julian's confidence that he didn't hesitate before offering the governor his own ungloved hand. Good to meet you, sir. Julian Marrero. Governor Marcelo Dragna. The men shook hands. Julian attempted to pull away, but the governor held on tight. Julian, you must not be from this isle? This time, Julian did hesitate. No, sir. I'm a sailor. First mate of El Baso Dorado. So, you're only passing through. The governor smiled. We like sailors here. It helps our economy. People are willing to pay a lot to dock here, and they spend more money while they visit. Now, tell me, what did you think of my rum? He waved his free hand around the barrel room. I imagine that's what you're down here tasting? When Julian didn't answer right away, the governor pressed harder. Was it not to your liking? No, sir. I mean, yes, sir, Julian corrected. Everything I've tried is very good. Including my daughters? Scarlet tensed. I can smell from your breath you weren't sipping any rum, said Governor Dragna. And I know you weren't down here playing cards or saying prayers. So tell me, which of my daughters were you tasting? Oh, no, sir, you have it all wrong. Julian shook his head, eyes widening, as if he would never do something so dishonorable. It was Scarlet, Tella broke in. I came down here and caught them in the act. No. Scarlet cursed her foolish sister. Father, she's lying. It was Tella, not me. I'm the one who caught them. Tella's face blazed red. Scarlet, don't lie. You'll only make this worse. I'm not lying. Father, it was Tella. Do you think I'd really do something like this, weeks before my wedding? Father, don't listen to her, Tella interrupted. I heard her whispering about how she thought it would help with her nerves before the wedding. That's another lie. Enough. The governor turned to Julian, whose brown hand was still firmly grasped in his perfumed plum glove. My daughters have the bad habit of being dishonest, but I'm sure you'll find more. But I'm sure you'll be more forthcoming. Now tell me, young man, which of my daughters were you down here with? I think there's been some sort of mistake. I don't make mistakes. Governor Dragna cut him off. I'll give you one more chance to tell me the truth. Or the governor's guards each took a step forward. Julian's eyes darted to Tella. With a sharp shake of her head, Tella mouthed the name, Scarlet. Scarlet tried to grab Julian's attention, tried to tell him he was making a mistake, but she could see the resolve in the sailor's face, even before he answered. It was Scarlet. Reckless boy. He no doubt believed he was doing Tella a favor, when he was doing quite the opposite. The governor released Julian, and he removed his perfumed plum gloves. I warned you about this, he said to Scarlet. You know what happens when you disobey. Father, please. It was only a very brief kiss. Scarlet tried to step in front of Tella, but a guard pulled Scarlet back towards the barrels, grabbing her roughly by the elbows and yanking them behind her, as she fought to protect her sister. For it wasn't Scarlet who would be punished for this crime. Every time Scarlet or her sister disobeyed, Governor Dragna did something awful to the other as punishment. On his right hand, the governor wore two large rings, a square amethyst and a sharply pointed purple diamond. He twisted both of these around his fingers. Then he pulled his hand back and struck Tella across the face. Don't! I'm the one to blame, Scarlet screamed, a mistake she knew better than to make. Her father struck Tella once more. For lying, he said. The second blow was harder than the first, knocking Tella to her knees as streams of red poured down her cheek. Satisfied, Governor Dragna stepped back. He wiped the blood from his hand on one of his guard's vests. Then he turned to Scarlet. Somehow, he appeared taller than before, while Scarlet felt as if she had wilted in size. There was nothing her father could do that hurt her more than watching him hit her sister. "Don't disappoint me again." "I'm sorry, Father. I made a foolish mistake." It was the truest thing she'd said all morning. She might not have been the one Julian had tasted, but once again, she had failed to protect her sister. "I won't repeat it." "I hope you mean that." The governor put his gloves back on, then reached into his frock coat and retrieved a folded letter. "I probably shouldn't give this to you, but maybe it will remind you of everything you have to lose. Your wedding will be 10 days from today, at the end of next week, on the 20th. If anything gets in the way of it, more than your sister's face will bleed." Let me get some water. I don't know if I'll be able to go all 3 hours. I don't think I've read dialogue for 3 hours straight before, so. But I hope everything with the stream is working properly. It seems that the subtitles are doing pretty well. I'm liking this story so far, actually. Chapters 1 and 2. I want to see. I'm interested. I'm engaged here. Anyway, chapter 3. Scarlet could still smell her father's perfume. It smelled like the color of his gloves, anise and lavender, and something akin to rotted plums. It stayed with her long after he left, hovering in the air around Tella, while Scarlet sat by her side, waiting for a maid to bring clean bandages and medicinal supplies. "You should have let me tell the truth," Scarlet said. "He'd not have hit me this badly to punish you." Wait, he'd not have hit me this badly to punish you, not with my wedding in 10 days. "Maybe he wouldn't have struck your face, but he'd done something else just as vicious. Broken a finger so you couldn't finish your wedding quilt." Tella closed her eyes and leaned back against a barrel of rum. Her cheek was now almost the color of her father's wretched gloves. "And I'm the one who deserved to be hit, not you." "No one deserves this," Julian said. It was the first time he'd spoken since her father left. "Don't," Scarlet cut in. "Your apology will not heal her wounds." "Well, I wasn't going to apologize." Julian paused, as if weighing his next words. "I'm changing my offer about taking you both from the Isle. I'll do it for free, if you decide you want to leave. My ship sets off from port tomorrow at dawn. Come find me if you change your mind." He divided a look between Scarlet and Tella before he disappeared up the stairs. By the way, I don't know what this guy's accent is supposed to sound like. I thought it was like British, but like I don't know. He comes across as like a sort of rough and tumble sailor, so I don't know if it's supposed to be like Cockney or something. I don't know. I'll figure it out though. "No," Scarlet said, sensing what Tella wanted before she said any words aloud. "If we leave, things will be worse when we return." "I don't plan on returning." Tella opened her eyes. They were watery, but fierce. Scarlet was often annoyed by how impulsive her younger sister was, but she also knew that when Tella finally set her mind to a plan, there was nothing changing it. Scarlet realized Tella had made her decision even before the letter from Caraval Master Legend arrived. That's why she'd been with Julian. From the way she ignored him as he'd left, it was obvious she didn't care about him. She just wanted a sailor who could take her away from Trisda, and now Scarlet had given her the reason she needed to leave. "Scar, you should come too," Tella said. "I know you think your marriage is going to save and protect you, but what if the Count is as bad as father, or worse?" He's not, Scarlet insisted. You know this if you read his letters. He's a perfect gentleman, and he's promised to take care of both of us. Oh, sister, Tella smiled, but it wasn't the happy sort. It was the way someone smiles just before they say something they wish they didn't have to. If he's such a gentleman, then why is he so secretive? Why have you only been told his title, but not his name? It's not because of him. Keeping his identity a mystery is another way of Father trying to control... It's not because of him. Keeping his identity a mystery is another way of Father trying to control us. The letter in Scarlet's hands proved as much. Look for yourself. She gave her sister the note. First day of the growing season. Year 57, Elatrine Dynasty. My dearest Scarlet, this will be my last letter. Soon I'll be boarding a ship and heading to the Conquered Isles. Your father wanted to keep the date of our wedding a surprise, but I've asked him to pass on this note, because I imagine seeing each other for the first time will be enough of a surprise. Though, from everything I've heard about you, I expect it will be a very welcome one on my end. As I write you now, the maids are already preparing a guest suite for your younger sister. I think both of you will be very happy in Valenda. The rest of the page was missing. Not only were her groom's words cut off, but her father had been kind enough to remove any traces of the letter's wax seal, which might have given Scarlet a further indication of who she was marrying. Another one of his twisted games. Sometimes Scarlet felt all of Trisda was under a dome, a large piece of glass that trapped everyone inside, while her father looked down, moving, or removing, people, if they weren't in the right places. Her world was a grand game board, and her father believed this marriage would be his penultimate move, putting all that he wanted within his grasp. Governor Dragna had more fortune than most island officials, from his rum trade and other black market dealings. Yet because Trisda was one of the Conquered Isles, he lacked the power and respect he desired. No matter how much wealth he amassed, regents and nobles from the rest of the Meridian Empire ignored him. It didn't matter that the Isle of Trisda, or the 4 other Conquered Isles, had been a part of the Meridian Empire for more than 60 years. The islanders were still thought of as the uncouth and undereducated peasants they'd been when the Empire had first subjugated them. But according to Scarlet's father, this union would change all that, joining him with a noble family that would finally grant their own some respectability. And of course, it would give him more power as well. This doesn't prove anything, Tella said. It shows he's kind and considerate, and anyone can sound like a gentleman in a letter. But you know only a vile person would make a bargain with our father. Stop saying things like that. Scarlet snatched the message back. Her sister was wrong. Even the Count's handwriting illustrated thoughtfulness, neat curves, and soft lines. If he were uncaring, he'd not have written her so many letters to ease her fears, or promised to also take Tella with them to the Meridian Empire's capital city of Valenda, a place where their father's hands could not reach. A part of Scarlet knew there was a chance the Count might not be everything she hoped, but life with him had to be better than living with her father. And she could not risk defying her father, not when his vicious warning still echoed through her head. If anything gets in the way of it, more than your sister's face will bleed. Scarlet would not jeopardize this marriage for a mere chance at winning a wish during Caraval. Tella, if we try to leave on our own, Father will hunt us to the edge of the world. Then at least we'll travel to the end of the world, Tella said. I'd rather die there than live here, or trapped in your Count's house. You can't mean that, Scarlet scolded. She hated it when Tella made such reckless exclamations. Scarlet often feared her sister had a death wish. The words, I'd rather die, passed Tella's lips far too often. But she also seemed to forget how perilous the world could be. Along with her tales of Caraval, Scarlet's Nana had also told stories of what happened to young women who didn't have families to protect them. Girls who tried to make it on their own, who thought they were taking respectable jobs, only to find themselves sold into brothels or workhouses with deplorable conditions. You fret too much. Tella pushed up from the ground on wobbly legs. What are you doing? I'm not waiting any longer for a maid. I don't want someone fussing over my face for the next hour, then forcing me to lie in bed all day. Tella plucked her fallen shawl from the ground and wrapped it around her head like a scarf, concealing the bruised part of her face. If I'm going to leave on Julian's ship tomorrow, I have things to take care of, like sending word to let him know I'll be meeting him in the morning. Wait, you're not thinking this through. Scarlet dashed after her sister, but Tella raced up the steps and darted past the door before Scarlet could reach her. Outside, the air was as thick as soup, and the open courtyard smelled like afternoon, damp, salty, and pungent. Someone must have recently brought a haul of fish to the kitchens. The ripe odor seemed to be everywhere, as Scarlet chased Tella under the weather-worn white archways and through clay-tiled halls. Scarlet's father never felt as if his estate was large enough. It was on the border of town, with more land than most, so he could constantly build more. More guest rooms, more courtyards, more hidden hallways to smuggle bottles of illegal alcohol, and who knew what else. Scarlet and her sister were not allowed in many of the newest halls, and if their father caught them running like this, he'd not hesitate to have their feet whipped. But injured heels and toes would be nothing compared to what he would do if he discovered Tella trying to leave the aisle. The morning mist hadn't burned off yet. Scarlet lost sight of her sister multiple times as Tella ventured into the foggiest corridors. For a moment, Scarlet imagined she'd lost her completely. Then Scarlet glimpsed a sliver of a blue dress, heading up a set of stairs to the highest point of the Dragna estate, the priest's confessional. A tall tower built out of white stones that gleamed in the sun, so everyone from town could see. Governor Dragna liked people to think he was a pious man, though in truth he would never declare his dirty deeds to someone else, making this one of the few spots on the Isle where he rarely ventured, perfect for smuggling covert letters. Scarlet picked up her pace at the top of the stairs, finally catching up to her sister in the half-moon courtyard, right outside the carved wooden doors that led to the confessional. "Stop!" Scarlet called. "If you write to that sailor, I'm going to tell Father everything." The figure stilled immediately. Then it was Scarlet's turn to freeze, as the fog lifted and the girl turned around. Sharp sunlight streamed into the tiny courtyard, illuminating a young novice dressed in blue. With her head covered by a scarf, she had only looked like Tella. Scarlet had to give her devious sister credit for being good at evasion. As sweat dripped down the nape of her neck, Scarlet imagined Tella pilfering supplies somewhere else on the estate, preparing to leave with Julian the following day. Scarlet needed another way to stop her. Tella would hate her for a while, but Scarlet couldn't let her sister lose everything for Caraval. Not when Scarlet's marriage could save them both, or destroy them if it didn't happen. Scarlet followed the young novice into the confessional. Small and round, it was always so quiet. Scarlet could hear the candles flicker. Thick and dripping, they lined the stone walls, illuminating tapestries of saints in various states of agony, while dust and dried flowers created a stale aroma. Scarlet's nose itched as she walked past a row of wooden pews. At the end of them, papers for writing down one's sins rested on an altar. Before her mother disappeared, 7 years ago, Scarlet had never been inside this place. She didn't even know what to confess. People scribed their ill deeds on paper, then handed them to the priests, who set the notes on fire. Like her father, Scarlet's mother, Paloma, had not been religious. But after Paloma had vanished from Trisda, Scarlet and her sister had felt desperate, and with nowhere else to go, they'd come here to pray for their mother's return. Of course, those pleas had gone unanswered, but the priests were not entirely unhelpful. Scarlet and her sister had discovered they were very discreet about delivering messages. Scarlet picked up a piece of sin paper and carefully penned a note. I need to see you tonight. Meet me at Del Ojos Beach, 1 hour past midnight. It's important. Before handing it to a priest with a generous donation, Scarlet addressed the message, but she didn't sign it. Instead of her name, she drew a heart. She hoped that would be enough. Chapter 4. When Scarlet was 8, to keep her from the shore, her father's guards warned her about the sparkling black sand of Del Ojos Beach. It's black because it's really the burnt remains of pirate skeletons, they said, and being 8 and slightly more foolish than now, she believed them. For at least a year, she didn't venture close enough to the beach to even see the sand. Eventually, Philippe, an older son of one of her father's kinder guards, revealed the truth. The sand was just sand, and not the bones of pirates at all. But the lie had already buried itself inside of Scarlet, as lies that children are told often do. It didn't matter how many other people confirmed the truth. In Scarlet's mind, the black sand of Del Ojos Beach would always be burnt pirate skeletons. As she walked there in the night, the speckled blue moon winking eerie light over the unnatural sand, she thought back to that lie. She felt it sneaking into her slippers and moving between her toes as she neared Del Ojos' rocky black cove. To her right, the beach ended at a jagged black cliff face. To her left, a broken dock like a massive tongue jutted into the water. Past stones that reminded Scarlet of uneven teeth. It was the kind of night where she could smell the moon, thick candle wax dancing with the salty scent of the ocean, full and glowing. She thought of the mysterious tickets in her pocket, as the smoldering moon reminded her of how their metallic scripts blazed earlier that day. For a moment, she was tempted to change her mind, give in to her sister, and to the tiny part of her still capable of dreaming. But she'd done that once before. Philippe had booked them passage on a schooner. She and Tella had only made it to the boat's plank, and going that far had cost them so much. One of the guards had been especially rough with Tella, knocking her out as he dragged her back to the estate. But Scarlet had stayed conscious as she was pulled off the dock. She was forced to stand on the edges of the rocky beach, where water from glowing blue tide pools sunk into her boots, and she watched as her father took Philippe into the ocean. She should have been the one to drown that night. She should have been the one whose head her father held under the water, held until her limbs stopped thrashing, and her body went as still and lifeless as the seaweed that washed onto the shore. Later people believed Philippe had drowned accidentally. Only Scarlet knew the truth. If you ever do something like this again, your sister will suffer the same fate, her father warned. Scarlet never told a soul. She guarded Tella by letting her believe she'd just become extremely overprotective. Scarlet was the only one who knew they could never safely leave Trista unless she had a husband who could ferry them away. Waves clapped against the shore, muffling the sound of footsteps, but Scarlet heard them. You are not the sister I was expecting. Julian strode closer. In the dark, he looked more like a pirate than an ordinary sailor, and he moved with the practiced ease of someone Scarlet felt it would be unwise to trust. The night dyed his long coat an inky black, while shadows lined his cheekbones, turning them sharp as two knife edges. Scarlet now debated how wise it was to risk sneaking off the estate to meet this boy so late at night on such a secluded strip of beach. This was the sort of wild, reckless behavior she always warned Tella about. I'm guessing you've changed your mind about my offer? He asked. No, but I have a counter-offer for you. Scarlet tried to sound bold as she pulled out the elegant tickets from Caraval Master Legend. Her fingers did not want to release them, but she had to do this for Tella. When Scarlet had gone back to her own room earlier that evening, it had been ransacked. It was such a disaster, Scarlet hadn't been able to discern exactly what her sister had made off with, but Tella had obviously been thieving things to prepare for this ill-fated voyage. Scarlet thrust her tickets toward Julian. You can have all 3. Use them or sell them, as long as you leave here early and without Donatella. Ah, so it's a bribe. Scarlet didn't like that word. She associated it too much with her father, but when it came to Tella, she'd do whatever she had to, even if it meant giving up the last thing she still dreamed about. My sister is impulsive. She wants to leave with you, but she has no idea how dangerous it is. If our father catches her, he will do far worse than he did today. But she'll be safe if she stays here? Julian's voice was low, slightly mocking. When I get married, I plan to take her with me. But does she want to go with you? She'll thank me for it later. Julian bared a wolfish smile, the whites of his teeth shining in the moonlight. You know, that's exactly what your sister said to me earlier. Scarlet's warning instincts kicked in too late. She turned at the sound of new footsteps. Tella stood behind her, her short frame covered in a dark cloak that made it seem as if she was part of the night. I'm sorry to do this, but you're the one who taught me there's nothing more important than taking care of a sister. Suddenly, Julian clamped a cloth over Scarlet's face. Frantically, she tried to push it away. Her feet kicked up black clouds of sand, but whatever potion laced the fabric worked its magic fast. The world spun around Scarlet until she didn't know if her eyes were open or closed. She was falling, falling, falling. Chapter 5. Before Scarlet lost all consciousness, a gentle hand stroked her cheek. It's better this way, sister. There's more to life than staying safe. Her words ushered Scarlet into a world that only existed in the delicate land of lucid dreaming. As a room made of all windows came into view, she heard her grandmother's voice. A pockmarked moon winked through the glass, illuminating the figures inside with grainy blue light. Younger versions of Scarlet and Tella, made of tiny hands and innocent dreams, curled together in bed while their grandmother tucked them in. Though the woman had spent more time with the girls after their mother had left, Scarlet could not recall another night she'd ever put them to bed. That was usually servants' work. Will you tell us about Carnival? Asked tiny Scarlet. I want to hear about Master Legend, chimed Tella. Will you tell us the story of how he got his name? Across from the bed, Nana perched upon a tuft chair as if it were a throne. Coils of black pearls circled her slender neck, while more covered her arms, all the way from her wrists to her elbows, as if they were lavish gloves. Her starched lavender gown was creaseless, adding more emphasis to the wrinkles etching her once beautiful face. Legend came from the Santos family of performers, she began. They were playwrights and actors who all suffered from an unfortunate lack of talent. The only reason they had success was because they were as beautiful as angels, and one son, Legend, was rumored to be the most handsome of all. But I thought Legend wasn't his real name, said Scarlet. I can't tell you his original name, said Nana. But I can say, like all great and terrible stories, his started with love. Love for the elegant Annalise. With golden hair and words made of sugar, she bewitched him as he'd done to so many girls before her. with compliments and kisses and promises, he should have known better than to believe. Legend wasn't wealthy then. He mostly lived on charm and stolen hearts, and Annalise claimed it was enough for her, but that her father, a wealthy merchant, would never allow her to wed a pauper. So did they get married? Tella asked. You'll find out if you keep listening, Nana tisked. Behind her, a cloud drifted over the moon, covering all but two tiny points of light, which hovered behind her silver hair like devil's horns. Legend had a plan, she continued. Elentine was about to be crowned Empress of the Meridian Empire, and if he could perform at her coronation, Legend believed it would bring him the fame and money he needed to marry Annalise. Only Legend was shamefully turned away because of his lack of talent. I would have let him inside, said Tella. So would I, Scarlet agreed. Nana frowned. If you two don't stop interrupting, I'm not going to finish the story. Scarlet and Tella puckered their lips into miniature pink hearts. Legend didn't have any magic then, Nana went on, but he believed in the tales his father had told him. He'd heard every person gets one impossible wish, just one, if the person wants something more than anything, and they can find a bit of magic to help them along. So Legend went in search of a woman who had studied enchantments. That means a witch, Scarlet whispered. Nana paused, and tiny Tella in little Scarlet's eyes grew as wide as saucers, while the glass room transformed into the wooden walls of a triangular cabin. Nana's story was coming to life before their eyes. Yellow wax candles hung from the ceiling upside down, pouring creamy smoke in the wrong direction. In the center of it all, a woman with hair as red as fury sat across from a boy made of lean lines, his head shaded by a dark top hat. Legend. Though Scarlet hadn't clearly seen his face, she recognized his symbolic hat. The woman asked what he wanted most, Nana went on, and Legend told her he wished to lead the greatest troupe of players the world had ever seen, so that he could win his true love, Annalise. But the woman warned he could not have both things. He must pick only one. Legend was as prideful as he was handsome, and he believed she was wrong. He told himself if he were famous, it would allow him to marry Annalise, so he wished for that. He said he wanted his performances to be legendary, magical. A breeze cut through the room, blowing out every candle but the one illuminating Legend. Scarlet could not clearly see his face, but she would have sworn something about him changed, as if he'd suddenly acquired an extra shadow. The transformation began right away, Nana explained. Its magic was fueled by Legend's true desires, which were powerful indeed. The witch told him his performances would be transcendent, blending fantasy with reality in a way the world had never witnessed. But she also warned that witches come with costs, and the more he performed, the more he would transform into whatever roles he played. If he acted the part of a villain, he'd become one in truth. So, does that mean he's a villain? Asked Tella. What about Annalise? Scarlet yawned. Nana sighed. The witch had not lied when she said Legend could not have fame and Annalise. After becoming Legend, he was no longer the same boy she fell in love with, so she married another and broke Legend's heart. He became just as famous as he'd wished, but he claimed Annalise betrayed him, and he swore to never love again. Some would probably call him a villain. Others would say his magic makes him closer to a god. Both Tiny Tella and Little Scarlet were halfway on the path to sleep. Their eyelids were more closed than open, yet their mouths both moved into upturned crescent moons. Tella twisted at the word villain. Tella's twisted at the word villain, but Scarlet smiled at the mention of Legends magic. And I think I'll do one more chapter today, just because my voice was not prepared for today, and I think you can already hear it getting a little, roasted. So I'll go ahead and finish this chapter up, and then we'll be done for the day. Chapter 6. Hold on, let me get some water actually. Chapter 6. Scarlet woke with the feeling she'd lost something significant. Unlike most days where her eyes opened reluctantly and she took her time stretching each limb before easing out of bed and cautiously looking around, on this day, Scarlet sat up the moment her eyes flickered open. Beneath her, the world rocked. "Careful there," Julian steadied her, reaching out to reach her before she tried to stand up in the boat. If the tiny tub they were in could properly be called a boat. A raft was a more appropriate name. It was barely large enough for the two of them. How long have I been asleep? Scarlet gripped the edges of the vessel as the rest of her surroundings came into focus. Across from her, Julian dipped 2 oars into the water, careful not to splash her, as he rowed through an unfamiliar sea. The water almost looked pink, with small swirls of turquoise that swelled as the copper sun crept higher into the sky. It was morning, although Scarlet imagined more than one dawn had passed while she'd slept. Julian's face had been smooth when she'd last seen him, but now his jaw and chin appeared to be covered in at least 2 days of dark stubble. He looked even more disputable than when he'd flashed that wolfish grin on the beach. "You blackguard!" Scarlet slapped him in the face. "Ow! What was that for?" The ruby welt bloomed across his cheek, the color of rage and punishment. Horror filled Scarlet at what she had done. On occasion, she had trouble taming her tongue, but she never struck another person. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that." She clutched the edges of her bench, bracing for him to strike back. But the hit she expected never came. Julian's cheek was a blaze of angry red, his jaw nothing but a series of tight lines, yet he didn't touch her. "You don't need to be afraid of me. I've never hit a woman." She stopped rowing and looked her in the eyes. Unlike the come-hither gaze he'd worn inside the barrel room, or the predatory look she'd seen on the beach, he now made no attempts to charm or scare her. Beneath his hard appearance, Scarlet could see the ghost of the expression he'd worn as he had watched her father strike Tella. Julian had looked as appalled as Scarlet had been terrified. On his cheek, the imprint of her hand was fading, and as it disappeared, Scarlet could feel some of her terror slip away. Not everyone reacted like her father. Scarlet's fingers unclenched from the sides of the boat, though her hands still felt a little shaky. "I'm sorry," she managed again, "but you and Tella should have never—" Wait. Scarlet stopped. The awful feeling she'd lost something vital flooded back, and that something had honey blonde hair and a cherub's face with a devil's grin. Where is Tella? Julian dipped his oars back in the water, and this time he did splash Scarlet. Icy drops of wet sprayed all over her lap. "If you've done something to Tella, I swear—" "Relax, Crimson. It's Scarlet. Same difference. And your sister is fine. You'll find her on the Isle." Julian tipped an oar toward their destination. Scarlet was prepared to keep arguing, but when her eyes caught sight of where the sailor pointed, whatever she intended to say melted like warm butter on top of her tongue. The isle on the horizon looked nothing like her familiar Trisda. Where Trisda was black sand, rocky coves, and sickly-looking shrubs, this bit of earth was lush and alive. Glittering mist swirled around vibrant green mountains, all covered in trees, that rose toward the sky as if they were massive emeralds. From the top of the largest peak, an iridescent blue waterfall streamed down like melted peacock feathers, disappearing into the ring of sunrise-tinted clouds that pirouetted around the surreal isle. Isla de los Sueños, the Island of Dreams. Scarlet had never heard of the isle before seeing its name on the tickets to Caraval, yet she knew without asking that she stared at it now. Legend's private island. You're lucky you slept on the way here. The rest of our voyage wasn't this scenic, Julian said, as if he'd done her a favor. Yet no matter how beguiling this isle was, thoughts of another isle weighed heavy on her mind. How far are we from Trisda? She asked. We're somewhere between the Conquered Isles and the Southern Empire, Julian answered lazily, as if they were merely strolling on the beach next to her father's estate. In reality, this was the farthest she'd ever been away from home. Scarlet's eyes stung as a spray of salt water hit them. How many days have we been gone? It's the 13th. But before you hit me again, you should know your sister bought you time by making it seem as if both of you were kidnapped. Scarlet recalled the destructive way Tella had gone through all her things, leaving her room in shambles. That's why my room was such a mess? She also left a ransom note, Julian added. So when you return, you should be able to wedge your count and live happily ever after. Scarlet admitted her sister was clever, but if their father figured out the truth, he'd be livid, especially with her wedding only a week away. The image of a purple, fire-breathing dragon came to mind, coating her vision with ashy shades of anxiety. But maybe a visit to this isle is worth the risk. The wind seemed to whisper the words, reminding her that the 13th was also the date on Legend's invitation. Anyone who arrives later than this will not be able to participate in the game, or win this year's prize of one wish. Scarlet tried not to be enticed, but the child inside her drank in this new world greedily. The colors here were brighter, thicker, sharper. In comparison, every hue she'd seen before seemed thin and malnourished. The clouds took on a baked bronze glimmer the closer they drew to the isle, as if they were on the edge of catching fire rather than expelling rain. It made her think of Caraval Master Legend's letter, how its gilded edges almost seemed to flame when they captured the light. She knew she needed to return home immediately, but the promise of what she might find on Legend's private isle tempted her, like those precious early morning moments when Scarlet could either wake up and face the ruthless reality of day, or keep her eyes closed and continue to dream of lovely things. But beauty could be deceiving, as evidenced by the boy who sat across from her, rowing their raft smoothly through the water, as if kidnapping girls was something he did every day. Why is Tella already on the isle? Scarlet asked. Because this boat only holds 2 at a time, Julian splashed Scarlet again with his oar. You should be grateful I came back for you after I dropped her off. I never asked you to take me in the first place, but you did spend 7 years writing to Legend. Heat rose to Scarlet's cheeks. Not only had those letters been something private she'd shared solely with Tella, but the mocking way Julian said Legend's name made Scarlet feel foolish, as indeed she had been for so many years. A child who'd yet to realize that most fairy tales did not end happily. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Julian said. I'm sure lots of young women write him letters. You've probably heard that he never ages, and I've heard he has a way of making people fall in love with them. It wasn't like that, Scarlet argued. There was nothing romantic about my letters. I just wanted to experience the magic. Julian narrowed his eyes as if he didn't believe her. If that's true, why don't you want to come? Why don't you want it anymore? I don't know what else my sister has told you, but I would think you saw what was at stake the other day in the barrel room. When I was younger, I wanted to experience Caraval. Now I just want my sister and me to be safe. Don't you think your sister wants the same thing? Julian stopped rowing and let the boat drift over a gentle wave. I may not know her well, but I don't think she has a death wish. Scarlet disagreed. I think you've forgotten how to live, and your sister's trying to remind you, Julian went on. But if all you want is safety, I'll take you back. Julian nodded to a speck in the distance that resembled a small fishing boat, most likely the vessel they used to travel there, since their current raft was obviously not built to combat the seas. Even if you don't know 2 coins about sailing, it shouldn't take you long to get picked up by someone else and return to your precious Trisda. Or, Julian paused and nodded towards the misty white isle. If you're as brave as your sister keeps telling me, you can let me keep rowing. You spend this week with her on the isle and see if she's right about some things being worth more than safety. A wave rocked the boat, lapping turquoise water against its sides as they drifted into the isle's ring of chilly clouds. Scarlet's hair stuck to the back of her neck as Julian's dark locks curled into waves. You don't understand, she said. If I wait to go back to Trisda, my father will destroy me. I'm supposed to wed a count in 1 week, and this marriage is our opportunity at another life. I'd love to experience Caraval, but I'm not willing to risk my only chance at happiness. That's a very dramatic way of looking at things. The side of Julian's mouth twitched, as if he were suppressing a smirk. I might be wrong, but most marriages aren't pure bliss. That's not what I said. Scarlet hated how he kept twisting her words. Julian dipped his oar in the water, just enough to splash her again. Stop doing that! I'll stop when you tell me where you want to go. He splashed her once more as the boat sailed closer to the shore, and the brassy clouds began to tarnish, turning shades of green and chilly blue. There was a scent in the air Scarlet had never experienced. Trisda always stank of fish, but the air here was mostly sweet, with a bit of tangy citrus. She wondered if it was drugged, for although she knew what she needed to do, get to the isle, find Tella, and then return home as soon as possible, she was having a difficult time telling Julian this. Suddenly, she was 9 years old again, naive and hopeful enough to believe a letter could make her wishes come true. She'd first written about her mother, Paloma. She'd first written after her mother, Paloma, had abandoned them. She'd wanted to give Tella a happy birthday. Her sister had been the most devastated when her mother left. Scarlet had tried to make up for Paloma's absence, but Scarlet was young, and Tella wasn't the only one who desperately missed their mother. It would have been easier to let her go if she'd at least said goodbye, written a note, or left a tiny hint as to where she'd gone, but Paloma had simply vanished, taking nothing with her. She disappeared like a broken star, leaving the world untouched, save for the bits of missing light that no one would ever see again. Scarlet might have wondered if her father had harmed her mother, but he'd gone rabid once Paloma left him. Torn up the entire estate looking for her. Had his guards raid the towns under the guise of searching for a criminal, since he'd not wanted anyone to discover his wife had run away. If she'd been kidnapped, there were no signs of struggle, and no ransom note ever arrived. It seemed she'd chosen to leave, which made it all the worse. Yet despite everything, Scarlet always thought of her mother as a magical person, full of glittering smiles, musical laughter, and dulcet words. When she'd been on Trisda, there had been joy in Scarlet's world, and her father had been softer. Governor Dragna had not been violent toward his family before Paloma had left them. Scarlet's Nana had taken more of an interest in the girls after that. She wasn't particularly warm. Scarlet always suspected she didn't actually like small children, but she told exquisite stories. She enchanted both Tella and Scarlet with her tales of Caraval. She said it was a place where magic lived, and Scarlet fell in love with the idea of it, daring to believe that if Legend and his players came to the Isle of Trisda, they would return some of the joy to their life, at least for a handful of days. Momentarily, Scarlet entertained the idea of experiencing not only a little happiness, but magic. She thought of what it might be like to enjoy Caraval just for a day, to explore Legend's private isle, before closing the door on her fantasies completely. There was 1 week until Scarlet's wedding. This was not the time to embark on a foolhardy adventure. Tella had plundered Scarlet's room, and Julian said she'd also left a ransom note, but Scarlet's father would eventually figure out it was all a hoax. Staying here was the worst idea possible. But if Scarlet and Tella stayed only for the first day of Caraval, they could make it back in time for Scarlet's wedding. Scarlet doubted her father would figure out the truth about where they'd been that soon. They'd be safe, as long as she and Tella remained for only the first 24 hours, and their father never found out where they'd really been. Time's almost up, Crimson. The cloud encasing them thinned, and the rim of the isle came into view. Scarlet saw sand so fluffy and white from the distance, it looked like icing on a cake. She could almost picture Tella running her fingers along it, and coaxing Scarlet to join her, to see if the sand tasted as sugary as it looked. If I go with you, do you promise there will be no more kidnapping attempts if I try to return to Trisda with Tella tomorrow? Julian put a hand on his heart. On my honor. Scarlet wasn't sure she believed Julian had much honor, but once they had all made it inside Caraval, he'd probably abandon them anyway. You can start your rowing back up again. Just be careful with the splashing. The corner of Julian's lips curved as he dipped his oars back in the water, this time soaking Scarlet's slippers with cold. I told you to stop splashing me. That wasn't me. Julian rowed again, more carefully this time, but water still soaked her feet. It was colder than even Trisda's crisp coast. I think there's a hole in the boat. Julian cursed as water moved up their ankles. You know how to swim? I live on an island. Of course I know how to swim. Julian shucked his coat and tossed it over the side of the boat. If you take off your clothes, it'll be easier. You're wearing some sort of undergarment, right? Are you sure we can't just row to shore? Scarlet argued. Although cold drenched her feet, her hands were sweating. Isla de los Sueños appeared to be about 100 yards away. It was farther than she'd ever swum. We can give it a go, but this boat is not going to make it. Julian removed his boots. We're better off using the time we have to undress. The water's cold. It'll be impossible to make it fully clothed. Scarlet scanned the cloud-covered water for another sign of a boat or raft. But what will we wear when we're on the island? I think we just need to worry about making it to the island. And by we, I mean you. Julian unbuttoned his shirt, revealing a row of brown muscles that made it clear he'd have no problems in the water. Then, without another word, he dove into the ocean. He didn't look back. His strong arms cut through the icy current with ease, while Arctic water rose around Scarlet until the bottom half of her dress floated about her calves. She attempted to row, but only succeeded in sinking the boat deeper. She had no choice but to jump. The air rushed out of her lungs, something cold and unbreathable taking its place. All she could see was the color white. Everything was white. Even the tones of the water had shifted from swirls of pink and turquoise to frightening shades of icy white. Scarlet bobbed her head to the surface, gasping for air that seared as it went down. She tried to push against the current with the same ease as Julian, but he'd been right. The corset binding her chest was too tight. The heavy fabric around her legs kept tangling. She frantically kicked, but it did no good. The more Scarlet fought, the more the ocean battled back. She could barely keep above the surface. A wave of cold splashed above her head, dragging her all the way down. So cold and heavy. Her lungs burned as she battled to reach the surface again. This must have been how Philippe felt when her father drowned him. You deserve this, said a part of her. Like hands, the water pressed her down, down, down. Oh, I thought you could swim. Julian wrenched Scarlet up until her head broke the surface of the water. "Breathe, slowly," he coaxed. "Don't try to take in too much at once." The air still burned, but Scarlet managed the words. "You left me." "Because I thought you could swim." "It's my dress." Scarlet broke off as she felt it dragging her down once more. Julian took a sharp breath. "You think you could stay afloat for a minute without my help?" He brandished a knife with his free hand, and before Scarlet could agree or protest, he darted under the water. Scarlet felt as if forever went by before she felt the pressure of Julian's arm wrapping around her waist. Then, the tip of his knife pressed against her breasts. Scarlet's breath caught as the sailor cut away her corset, drawing a decisive line down her stomach to the center of her hips. The arm around her waist tightened, and so did something in Scarlet's chest. She'd never been in such a position with a boy. She tried not to think about what Julian was seeing or feeling as he finished slicing the heavy dress and pulled it off her body, leaving only her wet chemise clinging to her skin. Julian gasped as he resurfaced, splashing Scarlet's face with water. "Can you swim now?" His words were more labored than before. "Can you?" Scarlet asked hoarsely, her ability to speak strained as well. It felt as if something very intimate had just happened, or maybe it was intense only for her. She imagined the sailor had seen lots of girls in various states of undress. "We're wasting our energy with talk." Julian started swimming, this time staying close to her side, though she couldn't tell if it was because he worried about her safety or if he was weak from helping her. Scarlet could still feel the ocean working to drag her under, but without her heavy gown, she could fight it. She neared Sueños' gleaming white shore at the same time as Julian. Up close, the sand looked fluffier, and now that she thought about it, much more like snow, more than she'd ever seen on Trisda. Resting clouds of magical white, a cold carpet stretched across the entire shore, all eerily untouched. "Don't give up on me now." Julian grabbed Scarlet's hand, tugging her toward the perfect tufts of white. "Come on. We need to keep moving." "Wait!" Scarlet scanned the crisp snow a second time. Again, it reminded her of a frosted cake, the kind she'd seen in bakery windows, perfect and smooth, without so much as a tele-sized footprint in the snow. "Where's my sister?"